Good morning, Boker Tov. And it is a good morning. Welcome to Ohav Shalom Messianic congregation. Those who are here in person and those thousands that are here online. There are about, every month, there's 2,000 to 3,000 people in some 38 to 42 countries that view Ohav Shalom and find value in it. So glad you all could make it as well. So exactly what is a Messianic congregation? Well, it's Jews and Gentiles who gather together at one in the Spirit to worship the Lord, Yeshua, and his Messiahship, and feel enthused about letting other people know about it. So this morning, I thought I'd give a little history lesson because many of you may not know how far back the Messianic movement goes. Of course, it goes back 2,000 years, and 2,000 years ago, there were Messianic congregations of Jews and Gentiles worshiping together. But each receded to their respective groupings, and for a very long time, it was in some places illegal to be Jewish, and there was an antipathy. But things changed, but very, very slowly. This thing moves very, very slowly. Fast forward to the year 1867, 1866 and 1867. There were people who were Jewish by lineage, but belonged to churches and so on. And they wore clerical collars, and they were, they took their beliefs very seriously. And there were also a group in England. So the people in the United States went to the people in England and said, listen, we don't have very many here, but you do. You have a good many. So we're going to urge you to form an association of Jewish believers in London. And that goes back a long way, and the British took this seriously. And so they did it. They formed an association, and they called it the British Hebrew Christian Society. And that was a radical thing to do back then, to be considered a Hebrew Christian. I mean, it was well, which are you, Hebrew or Christian? Well, we're both. And so that went on for some while, and it grew very, very slowly, at glacial speed, so to speak. But by 1915, I mean, this is many years later, the British came to the people of the United States, the Hebrew Christians in the United States, and they said, listen, there's not so few of you anymore. And you urged us to form an association, and we did so, and now we're going to urge you to form your own association in the United States. So in 1915, a long time ago, the United States formed a Hebrew Christian Alliance of America. And it kind of flourished. But you got a lot of Jews coming together, and they all have very strong opinions about what to do and how to do it, and so on and so forth. And by the second meeting, they had to call the police because it was so riotous. So, and I met one of the people who was part of that riot. So that was 1915. Now there's one in England, and there's one in the United States. And that went along until about 1925. 1929. You see how slow this thing moves? 1925, the people in the United States said, well, you know, we urged you to form an association in London, and you urged us to form an association here in the United States. Now there's two of us. We should have an international association. Ooh la la. So in 1925, there was something established called the International Hebrew Christian Alliance. And it would meet once every 3 or 5 years. And but soon after starting this, they said, where are we going with it? Oh, we got an association, we get together. What are we doing? Where are we going? What are we doing? And they decided that they were going nowhere without a youth movement. We got to have a youth movement. We need a legacy. And so they determined that they would have a youth movement. Problem was, they didn't have any youth. So it's kind of hard to have a youth movement. But they tried, and they tried, and they tried, and nothing worked. Nothing worked. How frustrating. So 1930s come, and 1940s come, 1950s come, nothing. Gloom. Could never get started with the youth movement. And but in the 1960s, the late 1960s, there was a revival out here in California. And a part of the revival was that there were a lot of Jewish people who were part of the revival. And so what to do? They kind of got to know one another, but are you Hebrew Christian? Yes, I'm Hebrew Christian. Are you Hebrew Christian? Yes, I'm Hebrew Christian also. But still, nothing's happening. There was one family, however, and one family decided that they were going to do something about this. So that was the family of Martin and Joanna Chernoff. I think everybody's interested in this history. I'm glad I'm doing this. So they were a couple in Cincinnati. Marty was the kind of guy, if you looked at him, you'd say, he looks like he belongs behind the counter at the local delicatessen. And, but he did go through a Christian seminary, but he refused to take a degree because he did not want to be under an authority or an assumed authority of any Christian organization. He felt it was important to be a Jewish guy no matter what. So Marty he was a bachelor. He was a bachelor. Never had any money to survive on, but he met a girl, and he felt called to Jewish work. There's something about this Jewish work that attracted him, and he met this woman, Johanna, and she was from an aristocratic family, doctors and so on, Southern girl. And she had a calling to the Jewish people. She didn't know why she had a calling to the Jewish people. But there it was. All she knew was, I got to be involved with the Jewish people. She was a Gentile, but I got to be involved with the Jewish people. So she meets Marty, who's a Jewish guy, and they have the same calling. He feels, I don't know how or what I'm supposed to do, but I know I'm supposed to stay a Jewish guy. And she has the same calling. They only met a few times, but they had the same calling. Therefore, how about we get married? So having met only a few times, she gets on a bus and they get married. She's 18 and he's 31 years old. They really didn't know one another, but they had the same calling. And based upon that, they felt that this was a marriage meant to be. So they got married, and they had 3 children, and but they felt we should do something about this urge to maintain a sense of Jewishness. So it took several years for them to come to a point where they felt like, what are we going to do about this? We have a calling, but what to do? So they decided they were going to form a Messianic congregation in 1970. So you can see how long it took to get to a Messianic congregation, but it was basically out of their mutual calling. And so they formed a congregation in Cincinnati. And they learned of somebody else who had, the Presbyterian Church had established a Hebrew Christian outreach called the First Hebrew Christian Church. So there were a few outreaches, one in Philadelphia, one in Cincinnati, one in Chicago, and there was a Cincinnati Messianic congregation. And they said, well, how can we call ourselves Hebrew Christians if we're going to have a Jewish congregation? That doesn't make any sense. It sounds very goyish to have a Hebrew Christian identification. So in 1970, they established a congregation in Cincinnati. And by the by, when people from the American Revival learned that there was a Messianic congregation, young single people from all over the United States moved. I'm getting on an airplane, I'm getting on a train, I'm getting on a bus, I'm going to where there is a Messianic congregation in Cincinnati. And so it flourished. Well, by the by, this Hebrew Christian Fellowship in Philadelphia, an outreach of the Presbyterian Church, they said, well, what are we going to do with this? And they said, well, you know, in Cincinnati, they have a Messianic congregation. Maybe we should consider that. Well, how would we do that? Well, we're going to ask Marty and Johanna to move from Cincinnati to Philadelphia. And that's what Marty and Johanna did in 1975. See how slowly this thing moves? It's taking centuries. So they did, and now there's 2 Messianic congregations, one in Cincinnati and one in Philadelphia. And people from the American Revival, the young and single people in their 20s, hippies basically, all moved to Philadelphia. I was part of that revival in the early 1970s. I'm elaborating, but so what? It seems like you're all interested. So I had my own history dating back to 1971 when I became a believer, and I learned about the goings-on in Cincinnati and the goings-on in Chicago and the goings-on in Philadelphia, and formed a Messianic congregation in Washington, D.C. But as being untrained theologically and being a new believer, I deferred to Marty and Johanna. Tell me what to do. I want to form a Messianic congregation. And so they became my mentors. And so we formed in May 18th, 1973, we formed Beth Messiah Messianic Congregation in Washington, D.C. So now, well, let me count them up. Let me see. We had Chicago and Cincinnati and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. And now people got the idea, maybe I can start one in my city. So I was considered one of the experienced people. After all, I had started a Messianic congregation. I didn't know what I was doing, but I had started a Messianic congregation, and it continued on and on. So I invited somebody who was a more experienced man and who knew his stuff theologically to come in and fill in for me, because I basically didn't know what I was doing. But I was available because I now had somebody taking my place. And so I was called upon to visit other cities where people want to start Messianic congregations. So I was, on the weekends, I would go to Boston and Baltimore, Virginia Beach, and I was on the circuit. And there were other people besides me, inexperienced people, didn't have any idea what we were doing, didn't know the Bible, but we were willing to travel. So we traveled to these cities and urged that you too can start a Messianic congregation. See, this is our earliest foundations, but it's all a true story. And so they began to spring up all over the place. Hey, it's a very entrepreneurial thing. Jewish people like to start businesses, so they start congregations now. Very entrepreneurial. Anybody can start a Messianic congregation. Just find yourself several other Jews and start one. You know, if somebody doesn't like it, call me Fisher. I'm going to start my own Messianic congregation for my family. So out of family desires, these Messianic congregations started and grew. And now there are 1,000 Messianic congregations that have flourished, and we don't even know where they all are. We have this international alliance that started in 1925. It grew, and now there's Messianic movements in 16 countries. But there's other things going on besides the 16 countries. I just learned from Olga Robinson this morning about a new group in Latvia. Oh, where? Latvia. Oh, yeah, we got a Messianic congregation in Latvia. So they'll be in touch. It is happening, it's happening, it's happening. For 2,000 years, there was a separation between Christianity and Judaism. And now, a bunch of upstart, ignorant people who don't know what they're doing, who don't have theological degrees, simply said, I'm going to start my own congregation. And that's how it's worked out, that we have these Messianic congregations here and there and everywhere. My son lives in Israel, and he tells me at the last count they made a list that there were 273 Messianic congregations in Israel. Blindness has happened to Israel until Jerusalem will be trodden down of the nations, of the Gentiles, until when? 1967. That's when it started. That was an official kind of we even flinched from saying so, but that seems to be kind of an unofficial birth date of the Messianic movement, 1967. And so it's flourished. And the blindness in part that has happened in Israel is slowly getting undone. There's also a blindness in part that's happened to Christianity. Christianity has had a blindness also about the Jewishness of the faith, but that's getting undone too. And what's evolved is something that is God's creation, made up of basically ignorant people without education, but who have a heart desire to serve the Lord. And that's enough. That's enough. And so we few are doing something that is of biblical significance. We don't know what we're doing, but we feel our way along. And you see, I mean, somebody comes in here, they've never been here before, they come up and they see 6 or 7 people playing instruments and so on and so forth. You know, these 6 or 7 people, none of them felt that they could play an instrument before. They needed persuasion to just stand up on the platform because they felt they were so inadequate. But you see, God helps. God has helped. So we're all part of something. We're all part of something. And we're all part of a ground level operation. We're ground zero on the change in the biblical drama. It's an honor. We're really honored to be a part of it. And we all feel that honor. Those who want to buy in and actually be a part of the biblical drama. You mean I can be like one of those people that I read about in the scriptures? Yeah, you can. You can. Nothing's been written so far, but it will be. It will be. And we will be part of that ground level operation. Now that's the full story. I never told it before, but you heard it now. And you see how slowly it has unfolded. It has taken over 100 years for it to unfold. So we're goods in process. Goods in process. Okay, I took a long time. I took a long time to explain it, but I've never explained it before, and I thought it was about time that I did so. So we begin our services with